So we've been covering the shlokas in chapter 6 so far, which is Dhyana Yoga. And we had mentioned in one of our classes, I think last week, of how the Lord moves in a stepladder form from practice to perfection. Then he comes back to practice to perfection, and then practice to perfection. And I had mentioned in one of the classes that we will see that. So I thought we would take today's class to just go over how the Lord moves from sadhana to siddhi, from sadhana to siddhi, and from sadhana to siddhi in 3 sections of this chapter. So the first sadhana to siddhi is from shlokas 10 to 15, where the Lord is covering Brahman realization, which is the realization of self and Paramatma. So from 10 to 15, the Lord is talking about how you move from practice to perfection if your goal is Brahman realization. Then from shlokas 16 to 22, the Lord again comes back to sadhana and moves to siddhi, which is from 16 to 22, the Lord is talking about Paramatma realization. So if you have to go beyond realization of self, you now move to realization of super self, which is Paramatma realization. That the Lord covers from shlokas 16 to 23. Today's shloka is shloka 24. So from shlokas 24 to 32, the Lord is going to move again from sadhana to siddhi, from practice to perfection. And in this section, the Lord is going to talk about Bhagavan realization. So sometimes there is a saying in English, we can't see the forest for the trees. So we are so focused on individual shlokas that we're not able to detect the pattern of the overall trajectory of the shlokas. So this is the pattern within this chapter, from sadhana to siddhi, from sadhana to siddhi, from sadhana to siddhi, but in 3 different levels of realization. From Brahman realization to the next step higher, Paramatma realization, and then to the next step, which is higher, highest, Bhagavan realization. So with that, we'll come to shloka 24. Sanishchayena yoktavyo yogo nirvinna chetasa sankalpa prabhavan kamam tyaktva sarvana sheshataha manasaivendriyagramam viniyamya samantataha sanishchayena yoktavyo yogo nirvinna chetasa sankalpa prabhavan kama tyaktva sarvana sheshataha manasaivendriyagramam viniyamya samantataha sanishchayena yoktavyo yogo nirvinna chetasa sankalpa prabhavan kama tyaktva sarvana sheshataha manasaivendriyagramam viniyamya samantataha. So please recite after me. Sanishchayena yoktavyo
Sanishchayena yoktavyo
yogo nirvinna chetasa
Yogo nirvinna chetasa
sankalpa prabhavan kamam
sankalpa prabhavan kama
tyak त्यक्त्वा सर्वानशेषतः
सर्वानशेषतः
मनसैवेन्द्रियग्रामम्
मनसैवेन्द्रियग्रामम्
विनियम्य समन्ततः
समन्ततः
सनिश्चयेन योक्तव्यो
निश्चयेन योक्तव्यो
योगो निर्विण्णचेतसा
योगो निर्विण्णचेतसा
सङ्कल्पप्रभवान् कामान्
कल्पप्रभवान्
कामान्
त्यक्त्वा सर्वानशेषतः
त्यक्त्वा सर्वानशेषतः
मनसैवेन्द्रियग्रामम्
मनसैवेन्द्रियग्रामम्
विनियम्य समन्ततः
विनियम्य
समन्ततः
Forward meaning and translation by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Saha, that, nishchayena, with firm determination, yoktavyaha, must be practiced, yogaha, yoga system, anirvinna chetasa, without deviation, sankalpa, mental speculations, prabhavan, born of, kaman, material desires, tyaktva, giving up, sarvan, all, ashekshataha, completely, manasa, by the mind, eva, certainly, indriya gramam, the full set of senses, viniyamya, regulating, samantataha, from all sides. Translation: one should engage oneself in the practice of yoga with determination and faith, and not be deviated from the path. One should abandon without exception all material desires, born of mental speculation, and thus control all the senses on all sides by the mind. Very important instruction for us here. So as we said, the Lord has been moving from sadhana to siddhi, from sadhana to siddhi, and again from sadhana to siddhi here in the last set of shlokas about the different levels of realization. So sankalpa means you have a desire, you want something. Vikalpa means there is something that you don't want. And so what is the difference between kama and sankalpa? Kama is a desire, but sankalpa is a resolution or a plan to achieve the desire. So for a civil engineer who has constructed a wonderful dam, even if there is a small hole in that dam, he knows he needs to fix it. If he doesn't fix it, that small hole will become larger and larger and larger through the force of the water. And eventually the dam will collapse. So the Lord is saying, without exception, we should abandon all these desires that come up as thoughts in your mind. So what is the trigger point for the desires? The trigger point for the desires are both our senses as well as the mind. It is not one only. It is both. Sometimes the senses trigger these desires, and sometimes the mind triggers these desires. So the external triggers are based on your senses. The internal triggers are based on your mind. The external triggers are obviously the senses, because the senses are focused on sense objects. So sometimes sense objects trigger desires. Sometimes you're even sitting alone all by yourself, and your mind itself is so deceitful that it triggers desires. So for a yogi who is practicing dhyana yoga deep in the forests, he doesn't have to worry about desires in relation to the senses. There's nothing much outside for him to worry about. So his biggest worry is his internal desires that are triggered by the mind. So repeatedly, the Lord comes back to being able to control one's mind. So we cannot allow even a tiny crack to develop. For a dhyana yogi, even a tiny crack, if it develops, finished. His sadhana is gone, and everything that he's done up until then is simply a waste. So we have triggers inside, which is jettisoned by the mind, and we have triggers outside that is jettisoned by the senses. So so the question for us is, there was a nice phrase that His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu uses, which is the difference between having what we don't have and desiring for that, versus wanting what we already have, that we already possess. So sometimes we have a lot of assets with us, but we get distracted by assets that we don't possess. So the change for us is to focus on the assets that we already have, rather than meditate on the assets that we don't possess. That is what actually causes such deep anxiety for all of us, is to focus on what blessings we already have and not worry about the blessings that we don't have yet, because our mind is so deceitful. It is always in this mood of comparison constantly. And if you read the purport of the shloka, Srila Prabhupada refers to a shloka from the Nectar of Instruction, where Srila Rupa Goswami talks about 3 essential traits that one must have, which is beginning with utsaha, which is enthusiasm. Then nischayat and dhairyat, which is determination, and then fearlessness of wanting to pursue that particular path. So Krishna is mentioning the same thing in the first sentence here, that one must have determination and faith. Even if we may apparently fail here and there, we should not become deviated from the path. This is the biggest challenge for a sadhaka. Even if something little goes wrong, we feel dejected, we start losing our enthusiasm, and before you know it, we've given up. So the Lord is talking about how two things are necessary. Determination is necessary, faith is necessary. Only then you can be undeviated on that path. And when you're undeviated on that path, the result would be that you will eventually abandon all your hankerings for things that really don't matter in life. You'll be satisfied with yourself, and you'll be satisfied with practicing Krishna consciousness, because that's the most important thing that we all have to protect, preserve at all costs. At all costs, we need to protect our sadhana. I was mentioning, right, the Shastras say the conditions under which you can leave the family. Sorry, I was mentioning this in another class, but there is actually a statement in the Shastra that says the only condition under which you can abandon your family relationships is when they prevent you or they impede you from your practice. Then you're allowed to abandon your family. I am not suggesting that we do that. We need to be cautious about these decisions, but it just suggests that your determination and faith is so strong, you will not allow anybody to stop you on that path. But this is the essence of this particular shloka, how determination and faith in your practices ultimately will lead you to perfection, from sadhana to siddhi.